Books in Sag Harbor. Wishing you all a happy and healthy holiday season and welcoming spring. We're so delighted to have our special guests, Rameshwar Das and Scott Chaskey this evening. Before we begin, just a few other announcements and welcome. Please join us in a couple weeks' time. We have Helen Harrison, art historian and murder mystery writer. She'll be joining us via Zoom for a discussion from her new book, The Artful Corpse, on April 16th. And following Saturday, she'll be out front at the bookshop to sign some copies of her book. So don't miss that one. And if you'd like to reserve a signed copy in advance, please let us know. And the same with Ramesh's book, Being Ram Das. If you'd like to reserve a signed copy, jot a note in the chat here or contact us at the bookshop. We'd be happy to help you with that. We're so especially grateful for folks who have been supporting us through book sales and good company during these very challenging times. It's reminded us how important it is to nurture our community, and we're so fortunate to have such a vital community on the East End of Long Island. So it feels kind of like old home weekend here with two special guests and more to come. So please, join our e-list if you're not already on it. Check out our website. We are also making plans to hold the wonderful Moby Dick Marathon reading later in September. This go around, a lot of the event will be held outdoors, but we do hope that we'll all be in a better, healthier situation by that time. So plan ahead, start reading Melville's great novel if you haven't already, but don't let that stop you from enjoying the program. So in any case, welcome everyone, and I'll turn the program over to Catherine, who will introduce our guests.
Great, thanks, Marianne. And I'd just like to ask everyone, if you don't mind, to keep yourself muted while we have the presentation, and afterwards we'll be able to have some conversation and some questions and answers for both Ramesh and Scott. But we're really thrilled to have them with us tonight. It does kind of feel cozy, and we so wish that we were actually in the bookstore and could be together and have a serious and a seriously fun and a seriously enlightening conversation about what you're about to hear. We're here really to celebrate the publication of the book Being Ram Das. And we have Scott Chaskey and Ramesh Das with us to be in conversation, two friends whose lifetime really has been dedicated to creativity and curiosity. Most of you may know them. Ramesh is a wonderful, talented photographer and teacher, in addition to being a writer. And he worked with Ram Das on several of the books that he published throughout his lifetime. Scott Chaskey is a poet, a farmer, and the author of several books, including This Common Ground and Seedtime. And Scott is also now at work on a forthcoming book about trees, which we are looking forward to. So many of us are very familiar or somewhat familiar with the iconic figure of the late 20th century, Ram Das, and the imprint that he left on the spiritual search that many of us here and throughout the country and throughout the world were on in that period of time. So we're very fortunate to be able to be in the company of Ramesh Das tonight, who will talk about that. And he and Scott will be in conversation about that, and also the process of creativity, the wonders and mysteries of that. So I'd like you all now to give a very warm Zoom welcome to Ramesh Das and Scott Chaskey. Take it away.
Thank you. It's really, I really appreciate Caneos as one of the lights of the indie bookstore world on the East End, and that you have carried that on, you too. Thank you for keeping that flame lit. Scott, I guess you and I are the April Fools.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not sure that we knew this before this event, but we chose the day that the days were suggested, and April Fool's was one.
It seemed
And
to
I
appeal
said,
to both of us.
yeah, I said I'm one of those. My birthday is the 17th, and Ramesh's is the 27th. So we got two bona fide April Fools here that you're listening to on the day.
Yeah.
I have lots of questions, Ramesh. And it's interesting that
Well, you ask, and I'll probably come up with some for you
you come
too.
up with something, I would think. That it's interesting that Catherine said, we all know something, or we may know quite a bit about Ram Dass, and I thought I did, but that was before reading this book. And the extraordinary thing about this book is how much you learn about him, and about he lived a long life, so about that span of years, which we were, this period of discovery starting in the 60s and everything. um, Again, I thought I knew a lot about that, but I revisited it and learned so much more by reading this book. So um, maybe you could start off about, the night that you heard Ram Dass in 1968 at Wesleyan, when it started at 7 o'clock and went on until 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah. Well, I was, as you know, many of you will know that Ram Dass had been Timothy Leary's psychedelic sidekick at Harvard, and they had finally gotten kicked out of Harvard. And but I was at Wesleyan doing my undergraduate in 1960. I started in 65, and somehow managed to graduate. But there was an announcement that Ram Dass, well, he wasn't Ram Dass at that point. He was Richard Alpert was going to give a talk, and it was going to be in one of the student lounge areas. It was informal, and it turned out, which I didn't find out until quite a lot later, that Ram Dass had done his master's in psychology at Wesleyan, and some of his students were by then teaching psychology there, and they were the ones who invited him. And he had just returned from India maybe 3 months before, and had gotten the invitation at this little ashram up in the Himalayas. And many of the students, including me, were expecting the modern living through modern chemistry, better living through modern chemistry. I think that was the DuPont slogan. And this is March in, frozen mud in Connecticut. And this guy walks in kind of a white dress, barefoot, with a long beard. And he did not look like a Harvard professor anymore. And he had been in the Himalaya foothills at an ashram learning yoga and meditation for 6 months, most of the time on silence. And the people that were around at the ashram didn't speak English. So he had been in a very deep, introverted, introspective place for that time. And he came back, and this was the first talk that he gave. And what he spoke about was his experience in India, and he connected it to his work in psychology and psychedelics, and brought it into the sphere of spirituality. and very much in relation to kind of Eastern spirituality. And it was pretty revelatory. I just remember that I experienced it as a kind of change in my point of view, in where I was seeing myself from, or how I thought of a self. It was, it was one of those experiences of, like, shifting from feeling like you're at the center of the universe to being a grain of sand on the beach. And it went on for many hours. After a while, somebody turned the lights out in this student lounge. People were kind of lying around on couches, and people were asking him questions, and it was just this voice in the darkness, and it was very powerful. So after that, he was staying with a couple of psychologists who were teaching at Wesleyan, who were old friends of his, and he stayed there. And I went over there the next morning and basically, wanted more. And after that, I started driving from Connecticut up to New Hampshire, where he was staying at their family farm. And he taught me some of the yoga and meditation that he had learned in India. And eventually, I made my own journey over there.
Part of what I hope that we'll talk about has to do with the writing of the book, the actual process of writing, and how that came about, and et cetera. But and actually the thread of, because that was such a powerful experience for you, and you're the co-author, so you're sort of the hidden voice behind his voice throughout the book. So I'd like to come back to that. But before that, one of the things that really struck me in the early part of the book was the fact that, I suppose I'd forgotten this, that the drugs were legal. And so actually,
Yeah.
while they were at Harvard, they were putting in orders and getting drugs that were being produced legally in Pennsylvania, and then carrying out their psychological studies and everything. So that's quite remarkable as a base to what became the hippie movement afterwards. That actually these Harvard professors were conducting experiments, and they were quite wild in my mind when you go back to it. But in fact, it was legal. It's quite remarkable.
And not only legal, but they really took a quite a scientific approach to it. And there was one experiment that I think was probably the most famous one that they carried out, called the Good Friday experiment, which took place in the Boston University chapel on Good Friday. And there was a famous preacher giving the sermon, and there were, I think, about 20 or so students from the Harvard, not from Harvard, from the Divinity School, but nearby. And half of them received psilocybin, and half of them got a placebo, which I think was like niacinamide, which is vitamin B6, which gives you kind of a flush and you think something's happening. But it was very clear about a half an hour into it that who had gotten the psilocybin and who had gotten the niacin. And they did follow-up questionnaires with the participants, and the divinity students who had gotten the psilocybin met many of the criteria that they had developed in advance of what constituted a true mystical experience. And there were follow-ups. The guy who runs what's the full name? It's called MAPS. His name is Rick Doblin, and it is a group that promotes psychedelic research now and has done a lot of kind of replication and brought it back into the mainstream. But he revisited the participants in that study 25 years afterwards, and still many of them said it was the most significant event of their life.
So that's a thread that runs through the book, is that, and it's part of his transformation, is getting high, you know, and you know, it's a part I like about the book, that I actually I found it as riveting as the first 200 pages were the struggle of his life, you know, and the difficulties that he faced. I was so happy when he went to India.
Yeah.
and and something else occurred, and somehow it seemed like a natural progression. But you know, there's that thread of the psychedelics, and apparently he told that story a lot about Maharaji asking him for the what was his term for it? For
He called it the yogi medicine.
yeah, right. He wanted some yogi medicine, and apparently it had no effect.
He took enough LSD to put 5 grown human beings on the moon, and nothing happened. And not only that, but he did it twice. Because the first time Ram Dass was sort of sitting off to the side, and he thought, well, when he got back to the States, he thought, did Maharaji really take all that LSD? And he thought, well, maybe he threw it over his shoulder. Maybe I didn't see him really ingest it. And so the next time when he went back to India, Maharaji said to him, did you give me something last time? And Ram Dass said, yeah. He said, did I take it? And Ram Dass said, well, I think so. And Maharaji said, you got any more? And he very intentionally and carefully placed each tab of acid on his tongue and swallowed them, and asked, acted like they were really delicious, and asked if he could have a little water with it. And then he said, will it make me crazy? And he usually sat wrapped in a blanket, and so he put his head kind of under the blanket for a minute or something, and he came up and his eyes were rolling, and he looked completely mad. And Ram Dass thought, oh, I've really done it now. I've killed my guru. And it just stopped. He was fine. And he just kept, carrying on normal conversation, which for those of you who may have had some experiences of that nature in your dim past, that is unlikely. But the conclusion from that was not that psychedelics didn't do anything, but that there were states beyond psychedelics. And I think that was the significant push that gave Ram Dass more impetus with his spiritual practices over the next years. And for others of us, many of the people who went to see Maharaji or went to India, kind of on pilgrimage, went because of psychedelics, because of that initial opening. And that certainly applied to me also. But it was clear that that was not the ultimate enlightenment. Alan Watts had a great phrase, which was, when you get the message, hang up the phone.
So So Maharaji, and this has actually to do with the writing process because I think you say in the end of the book that, well, first of all, Ram Dass didn't necessarily want to write this book, and you you convinced him that it was, you know, it was a good thing to work on together. Um, but also, uh, he, you framed it in the terms of the reality was what Maharaji meant to Ram Dass
Hmm.
throughout his entire life. So the book was actually written from with that as a the spirit that spoke at the heart of the book, basically, and then he agreed to it or something like that. So he's there always in this book. But you knew him. You visited a number of times, and you were part of that. What's the term for the sangha?
Satsang, Sangha, same
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
So yeah. So can you talk about him, the guru?
Yeah, let me see if I can, I'm going to try a screen share experiment with a photo for a minute. Let's see if this works. No, I have to go back. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is Maharaji, which means great king. Um, and he was also called Neem Karoli Baba. And Neem Karoli was the name of a train station. So he was the Baba named after that train station. And there's a whole story that goes with that, which I'm not going to, well, it's fun. But he was, I think when I first met Ram Dass, when I got to India, it was clear that Maharaji had come through him, that state of consciousness that Ram Dass was transmitting was very much the place that this Baba lived in. And he seemed very simple. And on the other hand, there was this kind of field around him. And mostly he kept up endless distractions, and you didn't really get to be quiet or to go inside very much around him. And but every once in a while there was a moment, and one of those I remember when we were sitting with him in the back of the ashram, and it just got quiet, and he kind of went into some sort of meditative state or something. And I closed my eyes, and I was kind of going in also. And then when I opened my eyes, I realized I was feeling more love than I had ever experienced from anyone in my life. Parents, lovers, anyone. And I looked around and I realized that everybody around him was feeling that. And it was like sunshine. He was just like radiating that place. And it was not verbal most of the time. You couldn't understand it. And it was not really something that he could teach people, except that, it was by his being. Ram Dass often said, you only teach by your being. And that was certainly the case with this rather wonderful character. And the guru idea is a hard one to get across in the West. And Ram Dass, I really recognized that problem. And I think he was able to translate it in psychological terms. And probably those of you who are involved in therapy of one kind or another will recognize this, because the guru is really a mirror for maybe our deepest inner being in some way. And, you know, if you think of the guru as your deepest inner being rather than as somebody outside you who is teaching or giving you something, that probably is the most useful way to work with that idea. Because if you get caught up in the form of some other or personality of some other being, it's not you. And nobody else really does it for you. It's
You know,
as they say, an inside job.
you know that's actually translated very subtly in the book through the repetition of Ram Dass recognizing that at moments of his life that, oh, that was Baba. Baba was here, right? The Mahariji was, you know, he was responsible for this, and I feel him, you know. So because you come back to that so often in the book, it's probably the best way that you can try and get that concept across, really.
Yeah, it's certainly something of that. And you know, in later years, after Maharaji died, very soon after we came back from India, when Ram Dass was there for the second time, he first went to India and met Maharaji in the end of 1967, and in September of 73, Maharaji died. And nobody was, I certainly wasn't expecting that. It seemed like he was going to be around for forever. And that doesn't seem to be how it goes. I'm going to share one other photo here, if this works. Let's see. This is just, this is at the little temple up in the hills that we stayed at a lot. And sweet moment. But I mean, in later years, Ram Dass continued that relationship on the inside. And it was, at one point somebody asked him, you talk to your dead guru? And Ram Dass said, yeah. And the person said, that's your imagination. And Ram Dass said, yeah.
That's great. You know, that photo does remind me that there are some great moments of humor in the book, which I very much appreciated. So I'm glad that you got those in there. And one of them is when he meets Joya. So that's a very important thing. And I don't mean to make light of this at all, but and you can talk about who she is and what those teachers meant in his life. That's an interesting thing in itself. But he goes to meet her, and he's taken by a mutual friend, and he goes down into the basement, and she's in a deep meditative state. And then when they bring her out of it, you know, she looks up at him and he says, "Who the fuck are you?" And then she says, "Is that guy in the blanket yours?"
Yeah. I'm kidding.
And she's the only one who sees it.
Yeah. She was, this is a Brooklyn housewife. And is this coming up? Let's see.
Not yet.
There. Okay.
There we go.
She was a Brooklyn housewife who took a Jack LaLanne yoga class and went into samadhi. And she was a somewhat, she definitely had something happening. And this is about a year and a half after Maharaji had died. And I guess we were kind of, wishing he was still around. And the fact that she claimed to have him sitting in her basement was attractive. And she definitely had what, in India is called Shakti, or spiritual energy. And sitting around her, she could definitely ease you into some other state of awareness, of consciousness. Now, on the other hand, she was still a Brooklyn housewife. And it got a little messy after a while. Ram Dass parted company with her in late 1975, I think. And I was also part of that crew, and I stayed on for a while longer and went to India with her on the first time she'd been to India, and it was the absolute worst trip I had ever had to India. And I've been a bunch of times, and it was pretty tough. At one point, we were staying at the little ashram in the Himalayas, where you saw Ram Dass and Maharaji, and she wanted me to throw my Nikons in the river because she said I was too attached to them. And we had a screaming fight about that at the ashram. That was pretty much the end of my relationship with her.
You didn't throw them in.
I did not, no. Some of these photos are evidence of that. But Ram Dass had relationships with the other teachers, and he felt that, he really got a lot from them. Trungpa Rinpoche is one of them. Let me see if I can put a shot of him up there momentarily, too. If this screen sharing thing gets weird, just let me know. I'll stop doing this.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing the photographs.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I really enjoyed about putting this book together was that we got to use a lot of photographs. And Ram Dass' niece, for instance, shared a trove of family photos with us, and a lot of these, really wonderful photos of him in his youth. And we got some from the Leary archive also. And, I think it's fun to get that visual grasp of what things looked like, like let's see if I can find this one of the house at Millbrook, which was kind of amazing.
Each
Here it is.
one of these, while you're searching there, each one of these, it's great with how the photos reveal it, but we could focus on, that time. Look at that.
Yeah.
We could focus on that time that was spent there. And that's when he was with Timothy Leary still, right?
Yeah, this is the house that they had in upstate New York at Millbrook that was eventually closed down and raided by the then district attorney of Dutchess County, a guy named G. Gordon Liddy, who some of you may hear echoes of, because who ended up being one of the White House plumbers for Nixon, who went to jail. And he and Tim Leary met up in prison again. And after they got out of jail, they did a lecture tour together. You can't make this stuff
No,
up.
you can't. Do that. Oh, boy. And also, the period with Trungpa, I mean, this is so, I really discovered, poetry as the sort of guiding light in my life in college. And my mentor and teacher was a wonderful poet named Milton Kessler, and his daughter is on this watch with us tonight, as a matter of fact. I babysat for her when she was 10 years old. This is a long story that we have there. But in that time, so I entered college, University of Binghamton, Harper College it was called, 1968. And on my orientation week, the SDS Society took over the administration building. So that's the period that we had, right? And while I was really focused on a sort of a lyric poetry tradition, I heard about these characters starting the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics at the Naropa Institute.
Yeah.
An entirely different new thing.
That was, I mean, Allen Ginsberg was the crossover between the beats and Buddhism. And he went to India and came back with a squeeze box harmonium and started chanting. Much like my friend Krishnadas, but probably Krishnadas has a little better voice. But Alan was on that first psilocybin trip that Ram Dass took in Timothy Leary's kitchen. Allen Ginsberg was also there. And they had many adventures together, including that at one point, Allen asked Ram Dass to sub for him at a demonstration outside the Rocky Flats nuclear plant in Colorado. And Allen was leading the meditation circle while all these wild-eyed radicals were making, rather strong political speeches. And meanwhile, Ram Dass is trying to keep everybody kind of cooled out and calmed down. He and Alan had some other good adventures like that. I think, let's see if I maybe can find it. Let's see. Yeah. All right, here's one more just for fun. Then we should do questions sooner, I think. This is a poster from the Human Be-In in Golden Gate Park this is about 1964 or 5 maybe. And as you can see, Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, Allen Ginsberg, Michael McClure, and an assortment of rock bands did this kind of great celebration just at the point when psychedelics were being outlawed by the federal government. And Leary was soon declared by Richard Nixon to be the most dangerous man in America.
Wow.
So personally, I got drafted as soon as I graduated from college. I think the next book that I want to do is of people's stories of how they got out of the draft.
Oh, boy. I think that could be turned around. I think maybe Richard Nixon was the most dangerous man.
As it turned out. And his successor seems to have gone one up on him, too.
So it is amazing how much we could go on till 3 a.m.
Yeah, I think,
However,
I mean, part of the point of this book and maybe even this conversation is the degree of interrelatedness that has occurred for all of us in this period. And that may actually be one of the predominant messages that we need to carry forward out of this.
but I'd like to hear, I think everyone would like to hear a little more about the process of writing, since you
Yeah.
were writing with him, I'm the voice is very clear, and you know, it's I assume it's the voice of Ram Dass, but that's not an easy thing to do when one is writing for oneself. I mean, so my teacher Milton Kessler said, uh, emphasized over and over again that one of the really important things for a writer to do was to develop a believable speaking voice. And that's been done in this book. That voice is there. But you're writing it with him. So I'd love to hear more about that process.
Well, first of all, it occurred over a decade. So we really went through things in, things that he had written and spoken about for years. We went back and I kind of re-interviewed him and looked at details and explored what things meant and to him and kind of the longer perspective of his life at that point. And it was a really a real collaboration. I mean, keep in mind that he still had aphasia after the stroke, which happened in 97. So this process started in 2009 or 10 and went through 2019. And in that time, his health went downhill. We both went through a lot of stuff. I was out working with him when my daughter was killed. I was talking with him at one point on the phone, and it was still at a time when he was able to get out of his wheelchair and transfer himself, and he said, I'm going to go get we were talking about a book about Ramakrishna, and he said, I'll go get my copy. And I didn't hear anything for a couple of minutes. And then I heard, I fell out of my chair. I'm on the floor. And I'm in New York, and there's nobody in the house. And there wasn't even anybody I could call at that moment. There was a woman driving by who's a cellist, which Ram Dass used to be also, named Ashana something. And she got this thought in her head that she had to go see Ram Dass. And she drives to the house and knocks on the door. Nobody answers. She sticks her head in and calls out, and he answers her. And she went up and got him off the floor and up onto his bed. And then finally his caretakers came back, and he ended up in the hospital with a broken hip. He went through, in that time, there was a lot of suffering, and he never complained. I mean, it was really quite remarkable. I mean, that example of how he dealt with his own, well, it's more than discomfort, was pretty instructive. And I remember at some point in that period, I had a bout of sciatica, and I was talking to him about it, and of how to deal with the pain, which was severe. And he told me what he did, and I tried doing it. I couldn't do it. It was a matter of, detaching from that identification with the pain, with the body. And I am not that adept. But he had some remarkable qualities, and his death was pretty remarkable for me. It was the first time I was with someone in the moment when they left their body. And it was clear that he left, but and the body was dead, but there was still this rather powerful presence.
So was he, given that, this followed his stroke when you're writing the book, so many details, and not just details, but really commentary on, consciousness and,
Yeah.
And his developing self. And did he remember those, or did
Most of it.
he
There,
go, yeah?
he was pretty clear in his mind, and he knew how he wanted to say things. And I would write stuff and read it back to him, and he would comment on it and tell me if it was what he wanted to say or how he wanted to say it, and we would go back over it. And there was a huge amount of material by the time we got to the end. I mean, it was slow going, like wavy gravy. The leader of the hog farm commune in California, who they all serve breakfast at the Woodstock Music Festival. He once said about Ram Dass, he went from being the master of the one-liner to the master of the ocean liner.
That's great. That's great.
And it was, it was that, and I developed some kind of patience, and I also, I started out transcribing tapes that I recorded of our conversations, and it ended up that because of his aphasia, I could, even though I'm not the greatest typist, I could keep up with him on the laptop as we were talking. So it ended up being sort of real-time writing that way. And I did have some great editorial help kind of pulling it together once we submitted the manuscript. And the hard part for me was that he wasn't around to, give a final okay on everything. He kind of left me holding the bag as far as finishing the manuscript.
But was he, given his initial reluctance, did he dive into it? Was he, as you got going and
Yeah, I mean, the way I talked him into doing it was that we would look back at his life kind of through Maharaji's eyes, as if. Not that I think that we succeeded at that, but it was a way to review his life. And I think he really found it very helpful. And I think, especially around the stuff, about his childhood and his mother and his relationships and his bisexuality or homosexuality, whatever he decided it was ultimately. He really saw into the depths of that more acutely and was able to release it in some way. He was kind of able, because his path was very much of the path of love. And of course, the hardest part of that path is loving oneself. And he was looking at his own life with a degree of affection and acceptance that was uncommon. And one of the alternate titles for the book earlier on was Ram Dass, An Incarnation. So it was looking at a life as a life, not as my life.
He
We're
had
way past question time here, Scott. We should take some questions.
question time. No,
Yeah, this is fascinating, and
I
everyone
know,
is
I'm
really
blathering on, I'm
enjoying.
sorry.
Everyone's enjoying the conversation. And but let's pivot maybe to some questions, and I'll ask people to put in the chat the word stack, and then we can call on you to ask your question, either that or use the raised hand icon. Since there's so many people here, that will be a way we can see you out there. So that's the word stack in the chat or the raised hand icon.
You know, maybe while we're waiting for people to ask questions, Ramesh had mentioned wanting to read something about his mother and this his actual mother, but also with a reflection on the Divine Mother. Could you read that passage?
Well, this is about his mother's death. This is just a paragraph, but it's an interesting prelude to what happens with Maharaji. Curiously, I didn't feel much loss after Mother died, at least not in the immediate moment. As a psychologist, I knew to be wary. No grief reactions, I told myself. Watch out. As people do, I avoided painful emotions by staying busy. I distracted myself with work, more lectures, more fundraising, and time with Caroline. That was his girlfriend at the time. And that led into his encounter with Maharaji, which what broke him open was Maharaji telling him about his mother's death and telling him details that there was no way that he could have known. And that blew Ram Dass's mind, literally. And it also, when he realized that that was coming from a deeply loving place in Maharaji, it opened his heart. I don't know. I can keep going about this, but are there any questions?
Yeah, I see James has a question. James Pugh, if you unmute yourself and ask, that would be great.
You're still muted, James. Can you unmute him, Catherine?
Let me see if I can ask to unmute him. I think James, can you speak?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, a couple of things. Related. I think it's important to understand that what Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert were doing was using substances that were not illegal. It's just that they hadn't been made illegal yet. These substances were things that were synthesized in the lab. These were not. There was nothing to be legal or illegal about it. And I was very interested with that thought. There was an op-ed in the Times, I think the day before yesterday, by Ezra Klein. I don't know if you know who Ezra Klein is.
It's familiar.
But he wrote about his experiences with psychedelics And the touchstone, and he's a gentleman that you would look at and you think this guy would never do anything like that. But it was about the efforts in Oregon state now to legalize psilocybin
Yeah.
for treatment of bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and supervised. This is supervised taking of psilocybin and guidance. And it really reminded me of the Ram Dass thing, the whole what you've been talking about. And it was just curious your thoughts on legalization and illegalization. And I mean, personally, I think everything should be legal like that. I don't think any of this stuff should be illegal.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's really, I think, wonderful that that research is coming around again, and it's being used in some really helpful ways to deal with PTSD. And I have a friend who's one of the NYU researchers who works with terminal cancer patients, and it's been of an enormous benefit to people, and mostly under fairly controlled situations, and people have learned a lot about how to do that in without people getting frightened or
But what is it
unbalanced.
what is it that makes the powers that be so fearful of this? No?
Well, I think it's considered subversive to conformity, probably, which it certainly was for me. But I don't doubt that it's threatening to especially in that period of the 60s when there was a lot of social upheaval. It became a touchstone and a kind of fulcrum for people's opening up to other ways of seeing things. And I'm just, briefly on legalization, I think that is a sensible approach to it. I think these are medical and health issues, if there are any issues around these things, and people need that freedom to explore their own being. That said, what I was saying early on about the limitations of psychedelics, I mean, it's a temporal experience. And that was what ultimately became the problem for Ram Dass, was that you keep coming down.
Thank you, Ramesh. I also want to mention, if for those who are on the phone, if you want to raise your hand, *9 is a way to do that. I think there is somebody maybe on the phone who would like to ask a question. So if you would like to either do *9 or *6, we'll toggle you to be unmuted. And then if there isn't a question, perhaps I'll ask if either Scott or, I see that there is a raised hand. Bennett has a question. Please ask your question.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I've got a slow internet connection up here in Maine, so I'm not using a video, but I want to say hi to all my friends. It's nice to see so many friends on this call and hear your voices.
Hello, Bennett.
Hello, Ramesh. I'm curious to have any advice you have for those of us who are thinking of writing books of biographical or autobiographical nature. Advice on the process. Where should we start? What's a good way to approach the mountain of the process, the Everest of writing a book of this nature? Thanks.
I'm the wrong one to ask. I think this goes in the category of the advice is free and worth every penny. It, I am awed by people's ability to organize the events of a lifetime into something that is of interest to others. And when you start reading other people's accounts, we realize that the variety of our human experience is so incredible. And I think we think of our own lives as pretty commonplace. I certainly do. And but when you can look back with that and maybe get help from talking it through with someone else, or reading others' memoirs and autobiographies and biographies of other people, the sense of uniqueness and commonality that I think we share is pretty, it can be helpful to others. And I think that may be a way to look at it. I don't have any advice on how to put a manuscript together, though. I had a lot of help.
I have something to say about that, especially to Bennett. The book that I'm working on right now has, taken me to places that I had not expected when I started writing it, and one of them is retelling the story and a scene in this period where I lived in Maine, and there was a certain walk through the woods to the Saco River, and this is going back to the mid 1970s, and so it's not biographical, but it's a story of the place and the place I was in at the time, and you have some good stories to tell, Bennett, and they play some music, and the music will take you to a certain place, and then there you are in that place, and you start writing it down.
Great advice, Scott. To use another craft to find your way through a different craft. I think that happens a lot. Poets use collages to help them too. So I'm still concerned that there is somebody on a phone who wants to ask a question, 631-377-1365. If you would like to, this is your final call.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can.
Okay, so my name is Lauren Dempsey, and I just wanted to say just a comment. I grew up, my mother was a devout follower of Ram Dass, and so my childhood was a lot about going to talks and listening, and my mother was one who bought all the books, and she took me we would go to the Lama Foundation during the summer in my childhood. And I have boxes of tapes, cassette tapes that she recorded of his talks or conversations or so, and I still listen to a lot of his. I mean, he's such a fantastic storyteller.
Yeah.
And I still love listening to his tapes. So that's just a comment. There's no question. And I'm sorry that he's not with us.
Me too. If you have tapes that you want to share, we have been putting as many of his original talks as we can online on ramdass.org, and you can listen to them for free. So if you want to share them with other people, we'll digitize them for you.
Yeah, they're not the
Put 'em
best
out there.
quality, but I'm here in East Hampton, so I can give them to you, and if you want them,
Cool.
they're
Yeah,
they're
that'd be
okay.
really fun.
Great. I'll figure that out. Thank you. Thanks for the talk, and a friend of mine sent me your book, and it looks. I just got it in the mail today, so it looks great. So thank you. Okay. Have a good evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
It
Well-
took a village, that book.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you, Scott. I'd like to see if there are parting words that you would like to share with us. Please do so. And while you do, I'm just going to drop in the chat a way for folks to get the book through us or to get it on bookshop.org, which is an online offering that came about early in the pandemic to allow small independent bookstores to help them. And so the link is there if you're not in the area and want to support us, you can get it through that. And we also have a non-for-profit, Canio's Cultural Cafe, which helps us maintain our brick and mortar presence on Main Street. And so if you've enjoyed tonight's presentation, we'd welcome a donation to the Canio's Cultural Cafe. So either of you, wonderful writers, artists, photographers, farmers, any last words for us?
Well, I'll leave the last word for Ramesh, but the second last word from me would be to encourage people to read the book, because there's so much in it. And, having lived through that incredibly intense time of the 60s, that year 1968 has reverberated in my life over and over again. And I never felt I was able to communicate, especially to my children, what that time was like. And I hadn't felt anything like that time, the intensity of that time, until now, until the time that we're going through now. So for that reason, I think it would be beneficial to read that book because of how it captures the whole period and the, more than that, the word soul comes up over and over again in this book. And what is the soul of a place and of our nation? And those are really large questions that we all need to be contemplating now.
First, I just want to thank you, Catherine and Marianne, for keeping the indie bookstore resource going, because it is one that we need. And just to follow on what Scott said, I think what Ram Dass tried to impart was kind of a movement from the head to the heart, from the mind to the soul, from thinking to loving. And if we can take some of those tools and use them in this crazy time, I think it'll help us all. So onward.
And inward.
Onward and inward. Thank you.
Thank you both, really, for this wonderful discussion. I mean, there really is, at this moment, a strong pull between what happened in that time period with what's happening today, and may it inform us, and may it bring us from the head to the heart. So I also want to thank everybody who joined us this evening. We, as Scott says, read the book. As you know, especially in the pandemic, writers who release books have had a really difficult time to get the word about their book out there and to get the book into the hands of people. So if you've enjoyed tonight, get it for yourself, get it for a friend. And we hope that we all can, be enriched by what we've heard tonight and make that step both outward and inward. So have a good night, everyone. We look forward to you joining us again on our next, or on another Canio's Zoom event. Okay, be well.
Good night, everyone. Thank you all. Scott, Megan, Ramesh, and
Thanks
guests.
so much.
We're so grateful to all of you for being this wonderful community. Stay creative and be well.
Yes. Lots of interesting notes in the chat. So Ramesh and Scott, you might want to read that or save it before you close out. People who've
Cool.
met Ram Dass and other things. So just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost. And thanks to those who posted in the chat. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.